So what happens when you're asking these creators to say, you're going to make less money here? Yeah, we're releasing you from exclusivity, but those other platforms aren't necessarily bringing you the same amount of value. Who's actually benefiting from this change? I think it's very obvious that it's Twitch, no one else. It should be a win-win, but it's not.
Welcome to Visionaries. I'm your host, Jacob Wolf, the CEO and founder of Overcome and a former ESPN award-winning investigative journalist. Over the past 10 days, the most popular live streaming platform, Twitch, has been in hot water. On September 19th, the website announced it'd be banning unregulated gambling from its platforms after years of issues around that content. Then, on September 21st, the company made a more controversial announcement. It'd be slashing creator pay starting in summer 2023, reducing pay to 50-50 after a streamer's first $100,000 in earnings, even for those with existing preferential 70-30 deals. That same day, Bloomberg dropped a bombshell report about how Twitch has become home to child predators, as its age verification systems are vulnerable and are allowing for underage children to easily stream on mobile. So yeah, a busy couple weeks indeed. For this episode, we figured we'd be topical. I'm joined by Cecilia D'Anastasio, the Bloomberg reporter who broke that big story, as well as Zachary Diaz, the former director of emerging content at Twitch and the former U.S. head of creator management at TikTok. Cecilia and Zachary, welcome to Visionaries. Cecilia, why don't you start us off? Can you walk us through a little bit of what's been going on from a higher level, maybe cover some details that I did not?
Yeah, absolutely. And also thank you so much for having me. So in April, we reported a story at Bloomberg about discussions around changes to Twitch's revenue structure that last week were announced the same day and time as an article I wrote about rampant predation at Twitch, which is neither here nor there. What was discussed along with these revenue changes was the idea initially of releasing Twitch partners who are enabled to receive a cut of subscription and ad revenue from exclusivity agreements to Twitch, which Twitch announced a little bit ago. Twitch's new take rate, which as Jacob described will be 50-50 for just the top 100 or 1,000 streamers after the first 100K earned, is extremely controversial because, as Jacob said, it is a lot more aggressive than other platforms' take rate, but also because Twitch is moving toward more of a focus on advertising, which, if you're paying attention to Netflix and some other streaming companies, advertising is increasingly being discussed as a way to boost profitability. However, for a live video experience, it's been pretty controversial among Twitch streamers who argue that it interrupts the kind of spontaneity, and it's been controversial among viewers who are concerned that, it kind of increases this distance between themselves and the streamer. Twitch pioneered the creator economy because of the direct donation model. I think a lot of other people would argue that the porn industry pioneered this first, which I would actually agree with. But Twitch was one of the first sort of mainstream non-NSFW places to do this. And inserting the advertiser as a medium between sort of the fan and the creator pay is something that a lot of people, including internal employees at Twitch, from what I've heard, have pushed back against.
Something that I just want you to explain as best you can, Cecilia, that I think the only person that's covered this with any level of depth, and he made a whole 45-minute video, 45-minute plus video. Okay, no. I want to say, yeah,
in the podcast.
I was gonna call out specifically how advertising works on Twitch, because I think this is really important to the discussion, and it's a nuance that is missing from the particular issue. And what I'm talking about there is the lack of Twitch tracking demographics for the people that they're advertising to, which lowers CPM rates, etc. I was referring to Devin Nash's video, which broke this down in a very significant amount of depth last week when all of this came up. Cecilia, can you walk through the audience sort of how Twitch sells advertising to the best of your knowledge, and how the way they don't track data affects that? This always feels a little icky, but I think it's really important for the discussion.
Yeah, I think an important part of being a journalist is also expressing limitations with my reporting. So I don't really want to share anything that I haven't reported myself. I think Devin would be a better person to talk about that a little bit. But we did report Twitch's CPM I think in our April article, which was $3.50 to $5 for 1,000 ad impressions, which at that time had remained essentially unchanged for years. I don't have current data on what that is. And if anyone wants to share that with me, I would really love to look at those numbers.
Something I want to mention there too, just for the audience, is how aggressively low that is. As someone who now works and sells advertising against, I mean, this podcast included, to be frank, but also just more generally, podcast CPMs range usually from anywhere to like $15 to $50 because they're less skipped. You can track more demographics. YouTube CPM kind of fluctuates, but I would say between like $3.50, $4 to about $7 during holiday periods where it's a little bit more expensive to advertise. So to hear that number from Cecilia, I think that's aggressively low for Twitch compared
if
to
it is
to
what the
rest of
rate
industry.
is now.
Correct. So Zach, I want to talk about this because another part of the missing nuance. You joined the company, right? You joined Twitch shortly after the Amazon acquisition, right? It happened in 2014. You joined in the summer of 2015. And I think that one thing, okay, before I even go even further with that, I just want to ask this. How involved when you joined the company was Amazon in day-to-day operations from your perspective?
Yeah, from my perspective, and obviously I had just joined as an onboarding associate, so I was a pretty low-level employee in the grand context of things, but they were pretty hands-off. I think that one of the things that a lot of people at Twitch at the time would say was like, wow, when Amazon has acquired other companies, they're a lot more hands-on. They sort of integrate the company really fast. They want to change trajectory, change the priorities. And Twitch was kind of left to its own devices, whether that was part of the negotiation of the acquisition or it was just the business and strategy of the time. But I think that for a long time, at least for the first 3 or 4 years that I was there, it felt like Twitch was a completely separate company. And I can say that specifically because I had the chance to go visit other Amazon offices. And this is perhaps a San Francisco tech employee benefit, perspective, but it's like other Amazon employees were like, you get lunch and dinner like served to you. We don't get that kind of bonus, and we got all of these perks in our office and these kinds of things. So even that was something that over time, as you saw cool office perks be sort of scaled back, you're like, is that a business choice? Is that an Amazon influence? Employees had to wonder. Of course, the company grew rapidly. You can't sustain those things forever. But I think Amazon was pretty hands-off, especially in the beginning. Aside from the one thing that I think is really missed and is now coming to the forefront is the ability for Twitch to utilize Amazon services at scale, like never before, right? Using things like AWS and all of these scaled digital services that Amazon offered probably allowed Twitch to grow pretty rapidly, especially at the start.
Well, something that's interesting about that is it seems now from parsing the language in this more recent blog post about creator pay is that Twitch is now paying a service fee for IVS, which is essentially a service they created. And IVS is an interactive video service distributed by Amazon Web Service that you see on other websites. I think I've seen it anything from like churches that are live streaming pay for IVS, like mega churches that are streaming their like live broadcast are paying for this service to be able to serve up live video that people can interact with, to like kind of more things that you would consider like concerts, other software uses that kind of make a little bit more sense closer to Twitch. That was developed by Twitch. I mean, I did a bunch of interviews, and I said this when I was tweeting last week about this. I did a bunch of interviews for a book that I was reporting on Twitch for a period of time before I founded Overcome and started focusing on this instead. And some of the people I interviewed for that were some of the early engineers working on those Twitch services and building up even the early JTV, Justin TV services that eventually evolved into what they are. From an IVS perspective, Zach, I understand this wasn't necessarily your role of responsibility, but how would you describe sort of Twitch's ability to build and create this live streaming platform in a way that was differentiated from the other people in the industry? Because that's what got them into this space in the first place as the dominant player.
Yeah, I think there's probably every team and every employee at Twitch would have a different perspective as this, because they're like, what we built and what we were doing was what separated us. I think that a lot of people would correctly attribute a lot of Twitch's success to the culture and the community of the platform and the ecosystem, which is just that even to this day, you can't replicate what Twitch has built. And that is off of the hard work of the streamers, the creators, the community members themselves. Twitch obviously did a lot of things to like enable emotes, which really propelled the culture and those moments of like meme insanity, or the cultural moments of something like Twitch Plays Pokemon, which are just irreplaceable in the context of Twitch. But I think that that's where a lot of people forget that, you know, the reason why gaming culture is what it is today is because of things like Twitch chat and just the evolution of the culture itself. But this is also something that I get to have a really unique perspective on, I think, and a lot of Twitch employees, is that like you can't forget that Twitch scaled its technology really rapidly and enabled creators to start making sustainable income over the long, grand scheme of things. Because in 2014, 2015, I remember my first subscription going to NASL, like StarCraft 2 esports, and like where monetization was for creators was in a totally different place. And then I remember in the first TwitchCon that we announced Twitch Prime, or, you know, Prime subscriptions at that time, and people being like, what do you mean this is going to revolutionize monetization? But things like just video ingest, being able to broadcast live HD quality video on the fly from any region in the world wasn't really something that was capable at the time. And that's because of brilliant engineers and technical people at Twitch, just like they've revolutionized where you can monetize content, you can also create and do those kinds of things. So that's where I would place the two real innovations. Obviously, there have been micro and different sort of like contextual things, but I think those are the two biggest places that I would place some innovation.
So I want to open this to kind of bounce off of each other, all three of us, and talk about this more broadly, because I think we all have kind of been here covering, or obviously, Zach, you a part of this, but the two of us, me and Cecilia, covering this as a business evolution, is the way that Twitch has evolved as a business under Amazon and how things have changed slowly, right? You mentioned the Prime integration there. That it's super... I mean, now it is a distinct part of the website and has been for a period of time. I did some reporting about sort of the org chart structure that changed at Twitch last year in the middle of the summer, where originally when Twitch was acquired, they were nested under Amazon Web Services, which was the answer to Andy Jassy, who is now the CEO of Amazon. And for those unfamiliar with AWS, more broadly, AWS is probably the biggest moneymaker in the world for Amazon. That service is hand over foot. The cost is expensive. It's expensive to run servers, but they have a really nice, good profit margin on there, versus Twitch, which is there is not a profit margin. They lose money. And I think that's pretty well known across the board. Even with, I think the most reported revenue number was somewhere like 2.4 billion or something like that Twitch makes annually if you go parse through Amazon's earnings statements I believe that was 2021. And so it seemed like, at least at first, part of the reason that Twitch was allowed to be sort of laissez-faire and let it have its own thing and be hands off from the perspective that you were describing earlier, Zach. It seems like that's because it was sistered paired with another group that just made a ton of money. So if you're just kind of reporting the high level Andy Jassy direct reports, things look like they're okay because the other one makes so much more money. What has changed with that, and this is what I thought was missing a lot last week, was that Jeff Blackburn, who is a content executive of Amazon, now runs all of Amazon Global Entertainment. Now he's in charge, and they have reorged the entire company to make Prime Video, Amazon Music, Amazon Podcast, Audible, and Wondery, all of their various different content companies, and Twitch are now sisters. And it is specifically a content media organization in a way that it was not even a year and a half ago. So I want to talk about that a little bit. I guess, Cecilia, you've been reporting on Twitch over the past few years and through some of this change. What is some of what you're hearing about how things are changing as a culture at Twitch with this kind of more further integration into Amazon?
That's a great question. So Amazon traditionally gives companies it acquires a pretty long runway before it expects profitability, and Twitch is not an exception to that. It's interesting, though, because although Twitch is under the content arm of Amazon, Twitch itself has lost a lot of its content executives over the last year. There was a lot of attrition in 2021, and in 2022, by March, when I reported an article on what Bloomberg called an exodus at Twitch, there were 60 employees who had left from our reporting. And in 2022, that included a lot of really well-known long-term Twitch employees who were interfacing with creators, as well as Twitch's chief content officer and chief operating officer. Those roles have not been hired into since then. And from what I've heard and what we reported last week at Bloomberg, there is kind of this like power vacuum at Twitch where people who have engineering backgrounds and very product focused backgrounds, like CEO and co-founder Emmett Shear, like President Dan Clancy, are really kind of turning Twitch into more of a product company, more of a tech company than an entertainment company. And there's a really good argument to be made that Twitch should look more at what entertainment companies are doing to retain their top talent, because we are in an increasingly competitive world where YouTube is grabbing top Twitch streamers, where TikTok, and I'm sure Zach can talk about this a little bit, is also exploring its sort of live gaming offerings. And at Twitch, if you're not looking at these top creators as talent and you are cutting their revenue share like Twitch announced they would last week, then that might be bad for your bottom line and might actually undermine a lot of the progress that you're making with the products and with the technology.
Zach, I have a follow-up on that for you.
Yeah.
Twitch was acquired 3 years after it launched, give or take, that 3 years and some few months. But
Right.
JTV had been around since I believe 2007 was its launch year. So it's about 7 years after the initial company had launched. Even Twitch rebrand happening in summer of 2011. One thing that struck me, and I always think about this comparison in my head every single time when talking about this, is that when YouTube was acquired by Google in the late 2000s, something that was different about YouTube is it wasn't necessarily quite the sort of massive cultural phenomenon that it is now, right? Or that it became in the early 2010s, right? By that point, they were already integrated into Google. And so they had access to Google advertising and everything else that Google does really, really well. Google's the best ad seller in the world.
Sure.
However, what it feels like with Twitch is this is a company that was acquired, was left hands off, and now it's paying for everything it didn't do. Do you think that's a fair assessment? And do you feel like Twitch was acquired maybe a little bit too late in its life cycle as a company?
That's a really good question. I think that's a fair assessment. I think it maybe points to a better synergistic acquisition of YouTube and Google as opposed to Amazon and Twitch, where like there are lots of natural associations between YouTube being like the world's second largest search engine, right? Because you can find things that you want to know or like be entertained by, just like you could Google. Whereas like with Amazon, its core business didn't really relate to Twitch at the time. So was it an investment from that perspective, a long-term like, oh, this is where we think content is going to be in the future? That is anyone's guess as far as that acquisition goes. But I think that it's absolutely true that the investments or the lack of prioritization from the start really put Twitch into the position where it is today. And I think there are two fundamental things to call out there. One of which is if Twitch had taken its understanding of monetization at the time and where it needed to be profitability wise from the start and said ads are going to be a core part of our business moving forward, 7, 8, 9 years ago, maybe both creators and communities and audiences wouldn't be as disgusted with the changes that are coming out right now, right? They would have been expected to create content that included ad breaks. The ad technology that exists on Twitch would have been better and more sort of industry standard, where there are things like shorter ads, skippable ads, whether it's banners and things like that. That's a whole context that like ad technology is hard. There's a reason that there are only a few dominant monopolies in that space or companies in that space. But I think that they would have done a huge disservice to ignore that. And instead, what they did was they focused on the products and revenue streams that made their creators successful, i.e. subscriptions. And now we are faced with this decision in 2022 that says, we need to make more money. We need to be more profitable. Therefore, we're going to eat into the share of our creators and arguably our contractors, the people who, if all creators disappeared from Twitch tomorrow, Twitch is useless. It doesn't serve anything to its creators, to its community, to its benefactors, so to speak. Whereas if Twitch disappeared tomorrow, there are other competitive platforms that could provide decent infrastructure for those creators and their communities to thrive. And I think one of the worst parts about that entire thing is like Amazon is doing lots of things to basically compete in the advertising industry space right now. And there's a reason why Twitch is like shifting so heavily towards ads, not just because of the actual profitability question, but because it beefs up Amazon's ability to say, hey, if you want to sell to gamers, to Gen Z, to millennials, we have the perfect network for you to deliver ads to. It's Twitch, especially being live focused. It's a different market than VOD only or asynchronous only.
I want to mention something along these lines as well. This is like deep Amazon lore, and I reported this back at Wired. But part of the reason why Amazon acquired Twitch, according to former Amazon employees that I spoke with, is to help advertise video games. Twitch streamers were going to advertise video games, and Twitch was going to be a place where you could be purchasing these games, including Amazon games from Amazon Game Studio, which of course has seen a lot of mixed success since its founding, with a lot of games being shut down and um, canceled shortly after release. And so it's interesting to think about Twitch's sort of like lineage as a business at this company being shifted around in terms of what Amazon is thinking it would do with it. Amazon paid $970 million for Twitch in 2014. That's a ton of money. And it's interesting to see, the company really, really, really double down on how it envisions itself to become profitable at what some former employees and current employees argue is at the expense of what Zach is saying, like Twitch's content and creator arm.
Yeah, and the next question I want to ask is, do you think it would be different if it would have been a different company than Amazon? Amazon is shifting very clearly, I think, now from a sort of logistical retail company, right? They're very good at logistics. So they can get things all over the world very quickly, and there are a lot of labor issues that come with that, very, very well reported by places like Bloomberg. However, they are now shifting to what I like to call like an everyday company. They want to be a part of something you're doing every single day, whether it be an Amazon Echo device in your home that you're interacting with to control your home devices, whether that be Amazon Prime Video that you're consuming video in, whether that, they've bought rights recently to The Lord of the Rings, which has been premiering the Rings of Power prequel. They have Thursday Night Football now. They're trying to become a bigger part of everyone else's lives other than just the place that you shop and buy your toilet paper, right? Like that's a totally different business objective for them versus some of the other companies that were in the Twitch acquisition mix back in 2014, including Google, who, it got so far as that a reporter reported that Google was going to be the buyer, and then it fell apart and it became Amazon instead. Yahoo was also in that mix, which Justin Kahn has talked about pretty explicitly, that him and Emmett went to visit Marissa Mayer, who was the former CEO of Yahoo, was the CEO of Yahoo at the time. And even Disney was in that mix as well, my former employer, because they were interested in potentially moving into content and finding some sort of sports integration with ESPN and some of the other things that are in their portfolio. If this was a content company that would have bought this rather than sort of a logistical retail company, do you think things would be different? That's open to either of you.
I do think so, because we have, and again, let's talk about Amazon Game Studio, right? Bloomberg and Wired, where I used to work, have both reported on Amazon's struggle to make video games. And of course, anyone can tell you video games are so hard to make. I mean, you have artists, you have engineers, you have designers, you have, every type of person coming together and make and market and find a community for a singular product. That's very challenging. But Amazon is a company that is very focused on rules. And Amazon also has this philosophy internally that somebody who succeeded in one arm of the company, for example, book sales, would be good in kind of a product agnostic way, working at the head of another arm of the company. Mike Frazzini, who was in charge of Amazon Game Studios for a long time, famously didn't really have too much of a background in the games industry. And we've seen failure after failure after failure from Amazon Game Studio, with former employees saying that it is not a content company. It is not a company where it is easy to cultivate the kind of weird, creative, ineffable spirit necessary to foster foster games. With Twitch, I think that there is an analogous situation going on there. From what I've been told, Amazon remains pretty hands off with Twitch. At the same time, there are broader directives that Amazon has for its subsidiaries, especially, 8+ years after it's purchased them, that might be a little bit uncomfortable for Twitch to kind of formulate itself into and to accomplish as itself being a content company, according to a lot of people. I think other people who view it as a product company are the ones who are facing a lot of the backlash right now.
I think that's really fair. I always think about like what would the world have been like if another company had acquired Twitch, if I had been working under a different management or structure or directive. But one of the things that I think is really important, and this was never said to me explicitly, it was just something that I came to like build as a thesis while I was working there, was Amazon seems to want to build the infrastructure of the world, right? They don't want to own the end product, but like it's that theory of like, who really made money during the gold rush? It wasn't the people who made or found the gold. It was the people who sold the axes and the pit. They built the infrastructure. And so that's why AWS is so important, is like, it doesn't really matter if you're, building the next service that is the most popular platform. If you're using AWS, Amazon still wins. And so I think that's one of the conversions of identify this technology in Twitch. It's obviously going to be a great place to invest in games, in content, but if we can build it into a white label service that we can then scale out to any other competitor that comes our way, we're still going to win in the end. And I think one of the really sad parts about that is we can look at other platforms, other places that have really put content at the forefront of their strategy and seen what it means to the creators and the communities when you do that, when you can uplift various marginalized communities or underserved or typically exploited communities who bring a lot of culture to the forefront. And I mean this from the discussions around Fortnite, where like you have, Black creators who are creating and popularizing dancing, and moves and things like that. And then Fortnite gets to come in and profit from it without sharing any of that revenue. What would happen if these were industries where we said the culture, the creators, the community, the people who are actually building our influence in these spaces actually benefit at the same time that we do? Yeah, you wouldn't get to profitability or like insane profit margins in 2 years, but you'd be sustainable. You'd be around for a lot longer and people would respect. And that's the really hard distinction, I think, is you can see what's the difference between a company that just pumps out like really not cool, not interesting content, but they're at the forefront of your pages, your feeds, your algorithms. And then there's the companies that are making something because they think it's valuable.
I think that, first of all, that's great. Everything Zach is saying is just genius and amazing. Zach also gave like one of the best quotes I've ever heard in my life for an article I published last week. Everyone was DMing me like, who is this smart gentleman? Be that as it may, I just wanted to bring up something else that we haven't really gotten into too much, which is like server costs at Twitch. This was like a big part of Twitch president Dan Clancy's blog when he was announcing changes to the 70-30 split for the top like couple hundred or thousand streamers. It is extremely expensive to run live video. This 2.5 million hours of live video are broadcast on Twitch in like 35 languages internationally every day. That is so much content. And unlike YouTube, unlike TikTok, unlike these other platforms, live itself is enormously burdensome, technologically speaking. Processing that, formulating that, making sure there's no latency. And this isn't me playing devil's advocate. I'm not in Twitch's I'm not in the executive suite. I'm not crunching the numbers with them. But one of the things that Twitch's president did say in his blog post was he did cite the server fees for running this content. It was interesting that he cited the retail rates for those server fees. Yeah, that's why I was laughing.
Yeah,
on video, and not necessarily a discounted rate that Twitch would likely receive. But I also think when we're talking about profitability, that is just an enormous part of the puzzle that it would be so interesting for us to kind of really crunch the numbers on, if anyone wanted to share those numbers.
I do just want to give one shout out to a prior colleague at Twitch, Cyrus Hall. He did a brilliant breakdown of just like how these costs could be considered, what's realistic, what's fair, from public perception, because he was a engineer on the I'm going to misattribute like video team. He built a lot of the early infrastructure and was instrumental. And he's like, some of this is very fair for them to include, but also the idea of like counting it as the public cost is not accurate. There is definitely a cost. And Cecilia, you said it brilliantly, which is that live video is infinitely more complex and costly than short form asynchronous video. And I will just say this every time somebody says, why can't another platform just come along and do Twitch, but better? And it's like, there's a reason why so many companies have come and gone. it's not easy to build. And same is true for YouTube, but it's like, it's not easy to build these systems, let alone the cultural impact.
Yeah, and you have to understand the long-term runway it will take to build that system. And I think like when you look at Mixer, and we had Brandon Freytag on the show last week who negotiated the Ninja and Shroud deals to Mixer, and talking to Brandon, like he said pretty explicitly, like the plan that Mixer had ultimately was not what it did, and it does take a long runway to be able to build a live video service that actually does carry traffic in a way that Twitch has. And it took Twitch forever to be that way. I mean, if we want to really dive deep into it, right? Like Twitch was relevant to gamers probably since Justin TV days because it was such a big category to gamers. But really the genesis of Twitch being a mainstream relevant website to me is 2018. And it's that Ninja Fortnite moment, and that is like it covered all over the news, and a whole new generation of people are rolling up and paying attention to this website in a way that nobody else had. And we all knew it was going to eventually get there, right? Like they had already by that point taken over CNN and monthly watch hours and everything else. Like there were a ton of people using the website. I don't want to get that mistaken, but there was a cultural relevance shift that happened in the past 4 years for the website that came along.
I also want to point out one thing that aligned with that is also another product-focused innovation at Twitch, which is the arrival of AutoMod. Twitch was, I think it's fair to say that Twitch culture was quite singular for a long time after it launched, singular being, white men, cis white men, live streaming on the platform because they were much more protected against harassment and against all of the sort of vitriol that a lot of early non-cis white male streamers faced. And with AutoMod being introduced and honed, I think that was 2016, over the next 2 years, that is one of the huge product innovations that allowed Twitch to really explode into the mainstream. And even though female streamers today still face a ton of harassment on the platform, mainstream means it is accessible to everybody. And we've also seen some struggles on Twitch's product end maintaining that promise of being accessible to everybody. For example, when streamers of color were disproportionately attacked as part of hate raids, and it took a very long time for Twitch to address that issue. I think that was last year. I think, it's really important to discuss the creator and content arms of the company being very leading, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But the mainstreamification of Twitch is also something that the product team did contribute to.
I see Theo in this space who hosted a space on Wednesday evening that I tuned into, and I think like XQC and Hassan and a bunch of others like simul streamed listening to the space while like giving their own commentary on the website. One thing that I thought was really interesting about that discussion is that, I mean, clearly this is a very passionate subject. Slashing creator pay is especially considering what I think Twitch did early in its tenure from even 2011 and even earlier with Justin TV, when people like DJ Wheat and Ben Goldhaber and others were out there kind of, mucking it up with people high level back then in esports, but getting them to move from other websites like Ustream and Own3D and getting them to move over to Justin TV and eventually Twitch. Part of it was Twitch's outreach to creators was way bigger than maybe any other platform of its kind, any other content, sort of user created platform of its kind, content wise. Something that's changed is, I remember the partnerships team that existed at Twitch that even some of the people on the team would jokingly say to me offhand that their job was essentially their Rolodex, right? Like they would be like, oh, I don't really do anything. I just know a bunch of people, right? And it's like they're like downplaying themselves. But nonetheless, like that was a very deep team with a lot of staff and certainly a high T&E budget because they were at everything and racking up thousands of dollars in bills at these events to take people out and sort of mingle and butter people up. And I want to ask basically, when do you all both think you started seeing the shift to that being a lot more strict, where the communication went from not talking to the 1,500 ranked streamer on Twitch to only talking to the top few hundred, right? Like getting a lot more narrow in the people that became important to the website.
Taking a moment to go back into the Rolodex of my mind. Time is a crazy moment for me to think about in COVID. But I think probably 2017 or 2018. And I think, like you said, it was because the scale of Twitch had changed. And I think there's something really important, which is that like internally at Twitch, there's this really easy story to look at, or maybe externally, when you look at Twitch, you see it as this like slow, consistent growth up into the right, where like the site is growing every day, numbers are getting bigger. Whereas realistically, I think it's way more appropriate to look at it, like you said, where there are these cultural moments, whether it's like, I think of it as the release of StarCraft 2, the release of Hearthstone, the release of legal or like LCS and, esports booming, but then the Ninja and Fortnite moment where these huge peaks that really bring Twitch into the forefront. And at each of those turns, I think that Twitch had to take a hard look at what are our actual scalable resources and what do we want to be investing those scalable resources into. And so in one context, a product company makes a product, it is infinitely scalable, or hopefully infinitely scalable, to every new user, whether they are a creator or a community member on the site. The partnerships team is not infinitely scalable. We, even in the best case scenario, one creator manager, partner manager, whatever you want to specific program manager, we can only hold so many relationships while we're doing that. And at every turn, it was like, well, how much additional revenue are you going to be bringing in for the company with your relationships? How do you turn your relationships into a scalable program? You need to think about, making these exponential returns on what you're spending your time in. And so I think every year, realistically, it was seen as, well, you're putting in, your 40 hours or 50 hours or 60 hours. Are you bringing back to the company more value than you're putting in each year? Because we have more users, more creators, they're bigger, they have bigger returns, and that kind of expectation was constantly there. I think that there was always a very important point or sort of a specific goal of the partnerships team and the content organization, which is we have a chance to uplift creators who don't necessarily get that sort of spotlight treatment, that don't get that attention that we think they deserve. And that is the combination of the marketing teams, where we could highlight programs and creators that brought a ton of value to the community. It was I can say one of the coolest things I got to work on was working for, I really care about like science and technology and education in the space. I got to work with NASA. Was NASA bringing in the dollars for Twitch at that time? Absolutely not. You can't run advertising on a government channel. So you can't actually make money from it. But I thought it was great because it legitimized the space. And so I got to make that trade-off, which is I think working with NASA will probably bring in more value for the things that I'm working on. But Cecilia, I'm very curious as to where have you heard creators maybe come to you and say, or other people in the industry say, yeah, Twitch doesn't care about us as much as they used to?
It's interesting. I've been hearing creators say that Twitch doesn't care as much about them as they used to since I started reporting on Twitch in 2016. That said, Twitch let go of 24 people who worked with creators in 2018. Twitch has been deprioritizing that aspect of its business for several years now, and along those lines, Twitch has also been hiring a lot from non-endemic, non-gaming, non-live streaming companies since around 2017. From Twitter, from Meta, from Pandora, companies like that. And I don't think that anyone would want to imply that, just because you're moving from one non-endemic tech company to a company like Twitch that's very idiosyncratic, you're not qualified to do your job. However, I do know that there were a lot of longtime employees at Twitch who felt that there should be more knowledge, not just about the products, but of the community, and more kind of hands-on interaction with the creators, and more listening to creators, and especially creators who do need help to succeed on the same level as some of their peers. So I had been hearing those complaints for a long time, and I don't mean to downplay those complaints. We've heard them from YouTubers, we've heard them from TikTokers. It is very challenging. I'm not going to say it's very, very challenging to be an influencer as a whole, but I will say it is very, very challenging to have a job where you need to be on 24/7 and accessible.
Yes.
And you do your 6-hour Twitch live stream, and then you spend 2 hours, filming, editing YouTube videos, and then you're on TikTok, and then you're on Twitter. Hassan Piker is someone who is ubiquitous across the internet, and that is because he and his team are just nonstop making sure that's the case. And
Yep.
so when you do have a really demanding job like that in a very competitive attention economy, I think that, if it totally makes sense why you would want more hands-on contact with representatives from the platforms you make a living off.
I think I just wanted to say one thing, which is I saw a lot of people on Twitter point this out, but it's a little bit absurd that in Twitch's blog post, they were like, here's the use case, here's how much it costs, blah, blah, blah. They cited 200 hours in a given month of like an average, creator. And I'm like, 200 hours is more
100 CCU.
With 100 CCU is 50 hours a week. So you are expecting people to put in more than a full-time wage or full-time job hours just live streaming, let alone all of the other encouraged by Twitch strategies of make YouTube videos, be on TikTok, be on Twitter. And I think there are some really important voices on Twitter that have been calling this out, particularly for Black and brown creators, where they say, I don't have the luxury of taking a risk and being on every other platform and making sure that my content is available everywhere, not just because it takes more time, but as Cecilia mentioned, think about all the vitriol and the hate and the sort of harassment that can happen across multiple platforms at one time. Now you are exponentially dealing with more. Twitch doesn't do it perfectly, but I think it does it better than most spaces. So what happens when you're asking these creators to say, you're going to make less money here? Yeah, we're releasing you from exclusivity, but those other platforms aren't necessarily bringing you the same amount of value. And you're opening them up to this idea that you might actually encounter more vitriol, more harassment than elsewhere. It just seems like it's who's actually benefiting from this change. I think it's very obvious that it's Twitch, no one else. It should be a win-win, but it's not.
Well, the other hard part too is Twitch's discovery is particularly awful if you are not a big creator or in the circle of big creators, right? Like the people who have succeeded a lot on Twitch is because they are sort of in the clique of someone else who is also very big on Twitch, right? And I've heard from a lot of creators. I mean, Maya Higo was one of our first guests on the show, and she explicitly said to us that she puts effort and time into her other platforms to drive to Twitch because Twitch is more socially engaged. She's able to raise for her bird sanctuary that she runs, the charity that she runs, right? But she has to use those other platforms as means of discovery to get people in the door to Twitch. And she, I mean, she's even one of those people. She's in a good group of creators: Cutie Cinderella, Ludwig, Atrioc, others, all these other people who they're all friendly, they collaborate in content, etc. And even she's having to do that, right? Even she's having to invest in the other platforms to get people in the door in Twitch. And I would consider her successful. And so it's tough, right? Like it's really, really tough to get in Twitch. And that's the kind of one of the last points I want to end on here before kind of pivoting a little bit and then taking some audience questions, is that Twitch has gotten more top heavy both in viewership and in these preferential deals. And I want to cover that because I think they are probably somewhat related. So Commander Root did some data mining that they published in, I believe, April of this year that essentially showed that previously, I believe in 2018, about 20% of the people on Twitch had some sort of deal that was irregular. So 80% of the creators on Twitch had the standard 50-50 partnership agreement that they just send out. You know, those are the people that make affiliate and then eventually make partner, and they just get whatever the normal standardized contract is. But there are 20% of them in 2018 that had something else, whether it be 70-30 or be some sort of other specific arrangement. I would imagine that includes like the publishers like Riot, et cetera, who, you know, those deals are probably a little different. The estimated percentage of that now is about 5% in 2022. Wow. And it's so we've seen a 15% drop in the amount of people, but we've also seen a ton of creators take up much of the volume on Twitch. And a lot of these smaller creators, once you get down past, like, I did the number the other day, but once you get down past like something to the effect of 1,000 streamers deep, you start getting to people who are about 100 CCUs. And so there's about 1,000 people that have higher than that in any given month when I was going through some of the stats. Why do you think that is? Why do you think it's so top heavy? And do you think that's contributed to Twitch's thinking of we only need to worry about those top creators who are grossing that, you know, amount of viewership?
Do you mind if I take this first?
Go for it.
Yeah, I was doing a little bit of research this morning because I knew you would ask this question, Jacob. And so Twitch Tracker, which is not totally accurate, but an amazing resource for journalists like me, says that there are about 50,000 Twitch partners. And of course, not all of those people will be active. I did a little bit of research. I added up how many concurrent viewers were looking at the top 20 streamers on Twitch at noon Eastern time today, and that was 670,000 live viewers out of 2.8 million people watching. So those top 20 people made up a quarter of the Twitch viewership, and there weren't even heavy hitters like XQC or ROnPlay who were on at that time. But one of the reasons why I bring this up is that, yes, Twitch is definitely top heavy. However, we have, as a public, criticized Twitch's decision to partner streamers who, aren't necessarily representative of the company's values. And there have been a lot of instances where top streamers have maybe said things that were racist, that were homophobic, that were toxic, that were, maybe they were saying horrible things to women that they're playing Valorant with, right? There are some standards that Twitch upholds for people who they empower to earn money off of subscriptions and advertisements on their platform. If there are 50,000 partners, that is a lot of people to keep track of. So I totally hear you, Jacob, that Twitch is quite top heavy, but this is also another thing that we want to weigh, Twitch's ability to kind of stand by people who it does empower to be representatives of the platform in that regard.
Taking a quick break from this episode to have a word from our sponsors. The journey of my career has been pretty fast-paced. I started writing at 17, and within 16 months, I went from having never written a published article to landing a job at ESPN as their youngest talent hire ever. With that fast-paced career, I've often found myself struggling with imposter syndrome and with work-related anxiety. But over the past few years, seeing a therapist really helped me guide my way. And if you think you may be feeling depressed, stressed, anxious, and overwhelmed, then today's sponsor, BetterHelp, is here to help you. BetterHelp offers licensed therapists who are trained to listen and help you. Talk to your therapist in a private online environment whenever's convenient for you. And if you're like me, where it seems there's never enough time in the day, you understand how important that convenience is. There's a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's 20,000 plus therapist network that gives you access to help that may not be available in your area. Finding a therapist can be hard, but BetterHelp simplifies that experience. You start by filling out a questionnaire to assess your specific needs, and within 48 hours, BetterHelp will match you with a therapist. From there, it's easy. Schedule video and phone sessions, message your therapist as much as you want, whenever you need to, and everything you share is completely confidential. You can request a new therapist at no additional charge anytime. I've been seeing my therapist Diane for 4 years now, and when we reflect back on the progress I've made in my life for the better, it's a pleasant reminder of why I started seeking help and the goals I had when we first started working together. Join the 3 million plus people who've taken charge of their mental health with an experienced BetterHelp therapist. Get your 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/visionaries. That's betterhelp.com/visionaries.
I think that's really important, Cecilia. Also, one of the things that was the genuine shocker for me from the internal was Twitch, branding and PR and how we choose who's a creator, who we endorse, all those things should be so easy. I consider myself a relatively moral and sound judgment. And then I'm like, oh, this is a global platform that has users of all ages, all ethnicities, all demographics and backgrounds. And what's appropriate for me to say here in my, bedroom in Oakland is very different than what's okay and acceptable in Russia, than in Japan, than in Sao Paulo, than in, any of these infinite number of cultural context. So I think that's one thing. And then now here's the hardest part. You mentioned discoverability is really hard. I make this comparison every time I talk to somebody who's like, why can't Twitch fix this? If you go into, I don't know how many people actually have cable television these days, but I say, whenever you go into a hotel room and you turn on the TV, they are still using a cable guide that just lists the channel and the program that is on that channel, because live discoverability, what you are most interested in right now, as it is being created in real time, is an insanely complex technological problem. It's really easy when it's short form, 10-second video, you can categorize it, you can hashtag it, you can make all those things. A YouTube video, you at least know the creator, but in a live stream, what Twitch is up against is, for somebody like Hassan, somebody like Pokimane, or any of these creators where they have 5, 6, 7 hours of streams, what happens in the one moment where I get up from my chair and I walk away for 2 minutes? That is a lifetime of TikTok minutes but that is a blip in the sense of Twitch. And so what Twitch is trying to do is say, we have these heavy hitters who are at the top, who constantly make really good, high quality, engaging content. We can bring in new viewers with them. And the assumption is that they will, like, as Hassan goes offline, he does raid somebody else. His audience goes somewhere else and they distribute throughout the community. Now, should Twitch be absolutely placing a bigger priority on how do we get more products that share audiences, find new creators to, uplift and showcase and do all of these things that would actually help those creators? Yes. I would also argue it's in Twitch's best interest if you're thinking about them selfishly and greedily, because what happens when 1, 5, 10 of their top streamers do leave for another platform, their stars end up with there's a vacuum in audience size. And if they don't know where to go, they're going to go to another platform. Twitch makes I think, a pretty strong business case for a lot of those viewers didn't go when Ninja went to Mixer, when Shroud went to Mixer. But what happens when you start getting dozens of creators, if not maybe 100? Who knows what the future holds? Twitch needs to be placing an emphasis on that discoverability, reducing that top heaviness. It's just hard when you have cultural heavy hitters.
Well, that's the YouTube strategy too. I just want to say, like, if you look at who they're signing, they're very clearly signing in two lanes, which is like the Ludwig offline TV sort of clique of friends who collaborate a lot on their content, right? And then also the Tim the Tapman, Courage, Ninja, types of guys that is a totally distinct other group with a distinct other audience that is interested in other things. And those are the two lanes that company is signing in right now. Yep. In the sense of getting creators in the door and getting audience in the door. Ludwig was on the show a few weeks ago and said the idea here is that when you turn off the stream, or when I turn off my stream, that they go find Fusely. They go find someone else who's in that sort of in his circle of friends, that they enjoy those people's content because he's collaborating with them and they're collaborating with one another. And that's a different strategy than what we've seen more recently. The only other place that's done that is Twitch. And I would say it wasn't strategic. It was just done because people on the platform got to know each other socially over time.
In addition to what we're talking about, Twitch just isn't the place for all kinds of content, period. We talk a lot about competition, like YouTube stealing people, TikTok stealing people, when in fact, if I'm a fan of Pokimane, and I am, I will watch her Twitch stream. I'll watch her play Valorant. I'll watch her do whatever on Twitch, talk to her fans. And then I'm going to watch her videos, her video about her moving on YouTube. I'm going to look at her TikTok, get ready with me today or something like that. And, I think that streamers diversifying their content in that way is good because it does bring in more audiences from more channels into their Twitch stream where, maybe they are making the highest percentage of their revenue. I'd be really curious to see how that changes after the exclusivity agreement is dropped. Yeah. But I'm just adding this in because I want us to kind of add a little bit more nuance to the idea of competition being stolen away from Twitch, where in fact it's just a very diverse content climate that we're in right now, where people are kind of demanding from people who they got to know playing League of Legends, also they're doing beauty vlogs, also they're doing house tours and things like that. You know what I mean?
I want to talk a little bit about some of the reporting you've done more recently, Cecilia, around sort of social responsibility on Twitch and some of the other things that are happening on the platform that are slightly more unsavory. So last week, Bloomberg published, which you worked on, a piece about sexual predators using Twitch as means to everything from grooming, etc., on this platform. And this is something that until really the past couple of years, I don't think Twitch has had an honest conversation with itself internally on how the rest of the world affects it as a platform. That they're not the only social media platform that has to have this discussion. Twitter has had a real issue with this, actually, objectively, right? They've had to figure this out as well. And I say that because I remember reporting on the Jacksonville shooting in 2018, and there just not being a wider conversation about how you deal with something like that at Twitch, right? Twitch just cut the feed the minute it went way too long. I watched that video enough times as a reporter to remember how long you heard pain and peril from all those people in that video. And it's sort of just seems like Twitch for the longest time has just had earmuffs on and ignoring the rest of the world that's around them, right? Despite being a platform that can lend itself to a lot of different things. And we see this constantly. And so I want to dive into that a little bit more generally is, what is the discussion from the both of your perspective? What is the discussion around how Twitch is addressing other issues outside of its sort of normal bubble?
I think this is really hard. I will be the first to admit I have an immensely biased perspective on this because I worked at the company for so long, and I've not only worked with the people who served directly on the trust and safety, teams that were like actioned those reports, had to investigate them, but also worked with the people who built the policy. And it would be remiss if I didn't say that those are some of the hardest working and probably most exploited people at the company, if at Twitch, let alone any other company, just from like the absolutely abhorrent things that they have to deal with on a regular basis. That is true for any moderation team or anything like that. I don't think it's fair to assess it as Twitch has had earmuffs. Should they be doing more? Have they not paid attention to every signal? Absolutely. I think that is true of any social.
I do want to clarify. Maybe leadership has maybe had a little bit of earmuffs. I don't want to. I'm always want to be really careful giving sort of the working employee flack for something that they don't have control over. But it does feel like leadership, at least, has kind of just been earmuffs on and just not paying attention. Right?
I think that's one of the issues around hiring executives or leadership outside of a UGC space, outside of a creator space, and who aren't really, and Cecilia, you probably deal with this all the time, which is like people who don't use the platforms that they work at, which is like, I don't really know how many leaders at any number of social platforms really understand just how quickly things can go bad on their platform, because they have never been the target of vitriol. They have never had to come across it in their natural use cases where they're using Twitter or Instagram or whatever. They're not the target demographic that receives that, whether it's like one-to-one harassment or they have to discover something horrible happening. And I think it's really the hardest part about all of this is I would truly say that it is not just a platform failure. It is a societal issue where we are not appropriately resourcing things like mental health or individual, addressing individual issues as a society that we can uplift and care for these people who need assistance. And it leads them to these really horrible outcomes. But the platforms allow that to multiply and spread further and faster than ever before. I think it's a really difficult trade-off as somebody who doesn't know the tech, how it would work. It's like, how do you stop somebody from being an extremist online? I don't know the answer to that. You can use lots of really good auto mod tools and machine learning and try and figure out and predict it. Can you stop, somebody from signing up for a Twitch account today and using it to broadcast hate and vitriol immediately? I don't know if that's possible. That's just me being defensive, obviously, because I love all of the people that I worked with who worked on those issues. But I would absolutely argue that no platform is doing it well enough, nor committing the kinds of resources to make it a safe space when they have that social responsibility, as you called out at the beginning. It's like, if you're going to allow these influencers to have massive audiences, you better be damn sure that you're encouraging them to be the best possible versions and with the most appropriate tools to handle it when it does go wrong.
I really appreciate that response, Zach, especially considering, your personal relationships and personal/work relationships with people and trust and safety. But I really have to push back against that point really hard. As someone who spent the last 7 months watching children get preyed on by predators live on Twitch, I do completely understand that moderating 2.5 million hours of live video every day in 35 languages is a gargantuan task. And I have so much sympathy for the moderators who see horrible things in their work, and I hope that they have all of the resources that they need. But with that said, when I was reporting this article on endemic child predation on Twitch, there were some very obvious platform solutions that Twitch could have implemented to mitigate the issue that it has known about since I reported on that issue at Wired 2 years ago that have not been implemented. The day I published that article, I downloaded Twitch on a mobile app, and it took me 1 minute before lying about my age and skipping their two-factor authentication, which does not work, and broadcasting myself, which any child could do with just no barriers. And, Zach, you mentioned that it's not different from other platforms, the challenges other platforms face, and I would disagree with that, because YouTube has an age and a subscriber requirement before live streaming. TikTok has an age and subscriber requirement before live streaming. Facebook Gaming does not, but they make it much more challenging to be discovered than Twitch, where discoverability is actually quite easy. You can go into so many content categories on Twitch, and there are immediately children that you see. That's why it was so unfortunately easy for me to find some of the incidents that I reported on for this article. So yes, the people who day-to-day work at Twitch do deserve all of my sympathy for what they're experiencing, but there are some policy and product changes that would really make that platform safer for kids that are just not being implemented, that other competitors really have. It's interesting to me, kind of on a broader level, about, Twitch has grown so much over the pandemic because of how easy it is to sign up for an account, how easy it is to be discovered, and that's great for the community, and the community is what draws so many people into Twitch. But at the same time, those are things that have allowed Twitch to become a place where predation, according to our research, has run rampant.
I will totally agree. I think that that was definitely me having my Twitch hat on in a capacity of like the people that I work with I know are trying to make the right decisions that they can every day. But you're absolutely right that there are pretty simple, even industry standard policy or product changes that could be made today at the expense of growth for the platform. I think that's always the trade-off that is called out, which is if we made account creation a little bit harder, or we made broadcasting a little bit more difficult to meet those standards, what would happen to our growth? And I think it's pretty easy that growth is great, but not at the expense of anyone's well-being or safety, period.
Yeah, well, and I also want to, just quickly, Jacob, sorry, I forgot to mention one thing when I was discussing this, which is that this is particularly a mobile issue that I want to address. I went through that whole spiel, and I'm not sure I mentioned that this was mostly on mobile, and I just wanted to be really specific about the issue in case Twitch people are listening. I apologize for interrupting you.
No worries. I think the other part too is that when an entrepreneur is passionate about something, and I think that this, until more recently over the past few years, existed at Twitch, and I think the exit of Kevin Lin is kind of a mark as to when this changed, because he was one of the original founders of Twitch, not of Justin TV. When an entrepreneur is passionate about something, they don't necessarily always think about all the social repercussions that exist around what they're building. Another good example of this that I think is another platform that's struggling with this immensely is Discord. It was reported earlier this year that actually, I believe, Cecilia, you did some original reporting on this, that the shooter at the Buffalo shooting was a Discord user who had a Discord server that he was espousing hateful rhetoric on, anti-Black rhetoric, etc., and then goes into a grocery store and shoots up a grocery store that is in a Black community. And I think Discord is struggling with so many of the same issues, where there are communities festering in their platform that their stance is, well, we don't want to auto mod people's private spaces, right? Like, we don't want to send in an auto moderator in every single server and police that. But at the same time, you're allowing that to happen, and it just makes it worse. When that echo chamber is created, and this exists a little bit on Twitch, when there's an echo chamber created of whether it be, racist or misogynistic ideas that are kind of bouncing off hateful ideas more generally, then you're enabling these people. You're making them feel welcome in a space that is very dangerous outside of the world of just Twitch or Discord or online communities. And that can become, I worry about this all the time. I worry about the young men who are using some of these social media platforms, especially the ones that are very catered. And I say men because it is predominantly usually men that this happens to, that commit these vile crimes disproportionately. I worry about young men that are using Twitch, that are using Discord, etc., that are feeling fulfilled and validated in the way that they think hatefully because they encounter someone on one of these platforms or in a community in these platforms that validate those feelings to them, especially when it's somewhat of higher regard, which we have seen on places like Twitch, where there is someone very famous, very successful that feels the same way they do and enables that behavior. That really worries me. I think I stay up at night thinking about that, and I'm not exaggerating, because as a reporter who covers this community, and I think that's really important. But I think while that issue doesn't arise from any sort of malice on the people of Twitch, like you were saying, Zach, I think at the same time it's a byproduct that should have been addressed earlier and needs to be addressed even further than it currently is being.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a reason why there's that saying of, like, what is it, like, bad things happen when good people do nothing, or like there's any variation of that thing. It's like you don't necessarily have to be acting in malice for bad things to happen. And if you willingly either ignore them or don't notice and don't take the time to pay attention to the signals that are telling you bad things are coming from what you're working on, you really can let that fester, as you said. And I think it's as simple as things as we all saw, when you can elevate a really terrible person on your Twitch channel just because you want to react to their content, and does it validate a lot of the feelings of, like you said, really like upset and angry young men who have no other options in their life but to feel like they can find power in a Discord channel where they have absolute power and then go and act on those things. It's an amalgamation of multiple platforms, all having various holes and security flaws that allow that to fester. And I think it only happens faster the more that we increase this accessibility like that.
It's interesting how, and Jacob, you were alluding to this, it's interesting how being a games industry reporter in 2022, you also are kind of an extremism reporter in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's wild.
And it's not the video games. It's not the video games that are causing
No.
the violence. It's the communities around them. And I want to make that distinction.
100%. There is no research supporting the idea that video games radicalize people at all, period. End of story. I did a big story about this at Wired last year. I interviewed a lot of people who were involved in a white supremacist group in Roblox that where people were role-playing fascism for a long time. And it's wild. But at the same time, there's a lot of games are mainstream, and everybody plays video games, including people who are extremists, which is awful. We don't want them in our communities. Game publishers don't want them in their games communities. Discord doesn't want them. Twitch doesn't want them. I want to just quickly say the Buffalo Shooters Discord server was private. That was a one-person server. It's not that he was preaching to other people specifically. From what I understand, that might have actually made it harder for Discord to moderate. I'm not sure. I would love a fact check on that. But yeah, I mean, extremism has become a problem in our gaming communities, and these companies that were founded to connect people to talk to each other while they're playing Counter-Strike are now finding themselves being at the forefront of these really heinous movements. Discord has hired a lot of people over the past couple of years, I think something like 10 people, but don't quote me on that, who are experts in extremism and who are trying to make that platform safer. I'm really curious about whether Twitch has done that too, because I know that there have been people, everyone from QAnon conspiracy theorists to people who encourage other people to commit suicide, including trans women on that platform. Yeah, anyway, this is something that I would, Jacob, it also keeps me up at night. And, I was really excited to see, though, that the Department of Homeland Security just announced a huge grant to study extremism in gaming spaces. So I think that there will be more information about this soon if gaming companies decide to share their proprietary data with those researchers, which would be sick.
I really hope they do, because I think a lot of games companies shy away from it because they don't want to be classified in the video games cause violence category. I mean, as someone who reported on the Jacksonville shooting, the first ever mass shooting at a video game tournament, there were a lot of people who, Fox News and others, and even liberal media, to be clear, who were like, video games cause violence. And it's like, guys, this is a football game. The football game is not what's causing the violence.
Oh, yeah.
This is not this doesn't even fit your rhetoric of Counter-Strike or Call of Duty or any of the other shooters that you want to try to make this leap towards. And then, I spent more than a month working with some talented colleagues at ESPN, really diving into the life of the shooter, which I don't like doing and feel a very certain way about it later. But simply for the fact that the predominant rhetoric in mainstream media was that video games cause violence. And it was like, no. This is just a person who is highly disturbed in a lot of different ways and was enabled by some of these online communities. And that was the reporting we did. And it feels weird because you don't want, when you're covering someone like that, you don't want to necessarily glorify the shooter. You don't want to put the focus on the shooter. You want to put the focus on the victims. And I felt very good because I did a entire SportsCenter feature documentary, 12-minute documentary on one of the victims and his sort of comeback story. And he went on to win an ESPY and beat Ninja for it. But it felt so sort of weird to dive into that because it felt like it was this time that was capitalized on by the media to push this narrative. All that to say, I think game publishers are wary of that, of falling into that their video games cause violence, but they need to also kind of open their eyes and look around and kind of see what else lives in there, because they are online communities at their core. Last discussion topic before we get into audience questions. Thank you to the both of you for taking some extra time as well. This has been really, really great and fascinating. So you mentioned earlier, Cecilia, some of the attrition that has happened at Twitch, high turnover. I mean, you go into LinkedIn and look at the number of people who you search former company Twitch, and it is a lot of employees in a very high amount. And I would say some people have more reason to leave than others, and different reasons varied from, but there are some unique ones together. You more recently reported that the senior vice president of, I believe her title is senior vice president of creators, or creator relationships, whatever her official title is. What can you say about why she left? Because it seems like it happened the week of the creator pay, but it doesn't necessarily seem like it was connected. So I'd love to hear a little bit more.
Yeah, I appreciate you pointing out that kind of lack of our knowledge of whether there was a connection there. One of the things that we tried to do in our article was to frame it as an issue of kind of a correlation. Like Constance Knight, who was the senior vice president of global creators at Twitch, and she used to work at Instagram and YouTube, did announce that she was leaving Twitch in an email the same day as Twitch announced these very unpopular changes that would be moving top creators' revenue from 70-30 to 50-50 after the first 100K earned. Twitch did not comment on the record for that article, so I'm not in her mind. What she said was that she's pursuing a new adventure that will provide exciting growth opportunities for her professionally and personally. That's also in the creator space. With that said, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast, there is a power vacuum around creators and content at Twitch. The chief operating officer, the chief content officer left earlier this year. Constance was quite high up in that part of the company too. And one of the things that I had heard from current and former employees, including Zach, who gave like one of the best quotes I've received in my journalistic career, was that you guys can't see him on Twitter, but he just cool.
I gave a cheer. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, but one of the things that we have heard is that Twitch has become more product focused as a company. That's led to a lot of attrition over the past 2 years. Dan Clancy, who's the president, Emmett Shear, who's co-founder and CEO, are very engineering product focused people. Dan is kind of this like Silicon Valley fixture who's had engineering positions at companies like Google, and bringing that into Twitch at a time where there aren't a lot of people at the table to advocate for creators has led a lot of longtime employees and people who work on the creator arm to feel like maybe this isn't a place that's valued, that shares their values at this time.
I think that's a pretty appropriate summary of it. Something that I'd been kind of like using in terminology with a lot of like industry friends and colleagues, just of like how this ends up coming out is you have people who work at these companies, whether it is content companies, Twitch, TikTok, YouTube, these places. You even have video game developers, and there's lots of other places that have like community managers where they are ultimately community interfacing. They actually have to work with the creators, work with the players, work with and communicate with the community that uses their product really often. I would say that a lot of these places launder the decisions that they make through those community interfacing positions, which is they get to make really bad decisions that impact the creators, the users, the community members. But you know who has to pay the price ultimately? It's me when I get a call from my creator who's like, what are you doing? Why are you endangering my future career? And it's like, well, I get to communicate why we're doing it. I can't tell you the reason. I wasn't in the room when we made that decision, but I have to deal with the social capital, like political ramifications of those decisions. And just like you had mentioned earlier, Jacob, like a lot of people at Twitch who are hired for their Rolodex, how often are you gonna stay at a company that continues to make decisions that feel like it is jeopardizing your relationship because of their business interest, when you could be saying, you know what, this just isn't worth it? And I think after years of attrition and trying to quote unquote fight the good fight, whatever that means to the people at Twitch, you end up getting into these rooms where if you're advocating for the creator, if you're advocating for doing more for their revenue shares or their discovery discoverability, or they're this, or they're that, you're fighting an uphill battle. It's almost Sisyphean, where there is no chance that there's somebody on the executive level who says, that's a great idea because it will help us make more money. They're going to say, if it doesn't make us money, we're not really interested in it. And so there's moments where key leaders leave who are helping push back against those. And then that decision-making process starts impacting their teams who reported into them. And it just amplifies from there. And it really becomes unsustainable. Now, that isn't to say that, like, I will say this, I get DMs all the time. I talk with people. There are still plenty of people who work at all of these companies that love the creators, that want to do more, that advocate for, but you have people who work at the top levels who are executives and leadership who get to say, I'm going to make this decision and I'm going to sleep real pretty at night because I don't have people in my DMs. I don't have people blowing up my phone. And I can't tell you that economic situation isn't in their favor. They get to make those choices and not deal with the ramifications. And that's what I think is so frustrating is you have somebody who says, don't worry, just stream 200 hours a month. It'll be fine.
Well, in this specific case, too, not only is the economic benefit in their favor in terms of they're the higher paid and get the decision based on the chain of command, but the economic benefit is in their favor from the business POV. And I think that's part of the discussion that I've tried to get across. Is that Twitch as a business doesn't make sense. That should not come from, or come down to the creators to fix it. It's not their problem to fix the site's monetization issues. But ultimately, that's where a lot of the motivations for these decisions are coming, is that from a business decision, Twitch does not make sense. It does not monetize correctly or well in the sense that other content media does. It costs a fortune. What Cecilia was talking about earlier with IBS and live video streaming services are super expensive to maintain on the basis that they do them, and there's not like an easy one-size-fits-all problem to any of this. Like, is your answer, oh, we're just going to cut off all of these creators if you don't have a certain amount of CCU, you can't stream on the website anymore? No, that's not the fix, but I'm sure it's something that's been discussed about how they deal with it. And you can't also, for all the millions of users already on your site, and they have like more than 2 billion visits last month according to SimilarWeb. Like, for all those people that are on your website, you can't also ask them to input a bunch of age data, because that feels gross for a lot of perspective, or age or demographic data, right? That more so than what they've already done. Which a lot of those Twitch users, when they signed up, all they had to have was a username and an email, and then a password. There was nothing else asked of them, like there is now. And like Cecilia said, it's not even foolproof when it is asked of them. So there are so many other issues here, and it just feels like the creators are paying for business decisions, historic and current, that just functionally don't make a lot of sense. I think that's the best way to wrap part of this discussion before we get into the audience questions. So,
well said.
So the first audience question is going to be from Theo, who hosted the space last Wednesday. So we're going to ask Theo to come up and speak.
One of the things that we were touching on earlier is one of my favorite topics. It's the discoverability and like individual creator discovery on platforms like Twitch and other platforms. I feel like it's easy to fall into the trap where a better algorithm could fix this problem for Twitch, when the problem is much more so a problem in how the platform's engaged with. The average Twitch viewer doesn't watch many Twitch streams when they come to the platform. They usually start their session on a specific channel's page, and if they watch until that channel is done streaming, they might hang around for a raid after, but they're not using the platform in a way where they're scrolling and hopping from stream to stream. The only live platform that's come close is TikTok, and they do that by interstitching asynchronous, compelling short-form content throughout it. Live content's inherently not very discoverable. The thing that we were touching on that's kind of like discovery is browsability. Twitch has a good browsing experience for live content, when both Facebook and YouTube really struggle with that. But the actual discoverability of good content is not strong on these platforms. While a platform like Twitter or TikTok or Instagram Reels has many more impressions per session, where as is scrolling through a feed on any of those platforms, we'll see dozens, if not hundreds, of creators' content. That's not the case on Twitch. You watch one creator's content. I am curious how Zach feels specifically going from Twitch to TikTok, if he's seen a difference in strategy of the companies and how like TikTok's growth and strategy and partnerships compares to his experience at Twitch.
Yeah, I think it's a really fair question. I mean, I think obviously there are lots of differences and things that could be spoken to about strategy. I think that it originates from the fact that TikTok is a short form video, platform first, whereas Twitch is a live video platform first and long form, excuse me. I think there's also a distinction between the way that they can incentivize and reward creators. So understanding that Twitch, places a lot of individual sort of control over the monetization in the creator's hands to the extent that they can. Obviously, you can't force somebody to subscribe, but a creator has a much stronger sort of incentive to be able to monetize their audience. Whereas on TikTok, it's a little bit less direct on how you monetize. There's things that are tied to overall creator funds and things like that. They have gifting on live video. They just introduced subscriptions, but I think ultimately, the end goal is the same, which is that all of these platforms, whether they are TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, et cetera, are fighting for audience attention. They are fighting for, sponsor and advertiser dollars. And it's how do we maximize both of those? I think they are just different strategies at that. Like you said, Theo, TikTok interstitches short form, compelling content that it knows you will be interested in with, hey, do we think you'll like this live stream from this creator that is tangentially related based on the 800 tags and, things that we think we know about you, versus Twitch is like, here are 10 creators that are our most popular, and we think you'll stick around for at least one ad break. It's just a different strategy towards engaging with them. I think they're both inherently popular. Some people know what they want to find. They go to Twitch. Some people have no idea what they want to watch. They go to TikTok.
I think that's a solid answer, Zach. No, I think that they are two different platforms. I'll be curious to see. The first thing that popped in my mind when Cecilia was reading that exit statement earlier from the Twitch executive she reported on is TikTok? Question mark? Like that's like they we were talking to Brandon about this last week on the show, but it seems like there's a something looming over there that I'm sure you can't talk about because of your more recent exit. But nonetheless, it feels like something's looming at TikTok that none of us see.
Sure.
And I'll be really curious to see kind of from a product perspective, kind of what their take is it, because live streaming for games is something they're clearly interested in.
Yes.
With as many people work on that are being hired over there that come from our industry. But it is not a pleasant experience to watch a video game live on TikTok on your phone.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah, we wrote about this. I'm like pulling up the article right now. Sometimes when you're, I'm sure you relate to this, Jacob, you're like, did I write this article? It was 5 months ago. But we did an article about kind of TikTok biting at Twitch's heels when it came to game live streaming back in May. And it was interesting because there were a lot of people who TikTok had hired directly from Twitch, including Zach, so he can talk more about this. But what was interesting to me was that we interviewed a lot of streamers who were like, well, exclusivity wasn't up yet. Twitch was kind of like on the DL, like loosening up on enforcing the exclusivity agreement for partners. But people would they would like put their phone, you can't see what I'm doing, but they would put their phone kind of like against their monitor, and they would be live streaming themselves on Twitch through TikTok Live and just post the link to Twitch there. So you would like go in. It was just about discoverability.
Function.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're right. I mean, I was just going to say, Jacob, I agree with you. I don't want to watch a lot of live gaming on TikTok, considering what it looks like right now.
You don't enjoy like a mirror, like, and then like 8 different refractions and somebody with just a link to their Twitch? That's not compelling. Shocker.
I mean, it's not even just the Twitch people they're poaching. This is why I feel so interested in this, right? Like, I know someone who used to work at Streamlabs that works over at TikTok now and creators. I know somebody who used to manage esports teams that works at TikTok and creators, right? Like, and so these are people that are deeply connected to this industry and the professionals in this industry. Some who go on to be highly successful live creators, right? When they're kind of done with the more, in the case of esports, they're playing careers, right? They go on to be successful live creators. So that's why I say it kind of feels like something's festering. So, all right, we'll end it on this. Chris Kovalik, Kago had a good question. We'll bring them up to ask, and then we'll call it there. Thank you all though for tuning in. This has been a really great discussion.
I'll get to my question very quickly here, but I just wanted to echo what the discussion earlier on kind of the dark side of the internet. And the quote that I've heard before, but it particularly resonated in this context is, bad things happen when good people do nothing. And as a game developer with my own community, I can't tell you how quickly things will hit the fan if I am not, and my team is not constantly, vigilantly trying to maintain it in good health. So it's remarkable how quickly things can fall apart if you're not very, very focused on trying to keep things happy and healthy. The nature of my question's on a very different subject, which is where we started, where the subject of the talk today, with Twitch cutting creator pay, kind of thinking more product oriented, more business oriented. Creators are, migrating to YouTube. Is there, is this a fight that's only going to be fought between YouTube, TikTok, Twitch, or do we see kind of like a independent? I saw, Fan House, I guess. I'm not too familiar with that platform, but they went viral on Twitter. There's also other companies that are, trying to make like a Shopify-like experience or a Squarespace-like experience where the creator owns their own video portal. What's your all take on where creators are going to go? Is it going to be to another platform? Is it going to be to host their own thing? What do you think?
I'm happy to jump into this one because I have so many thoughts. I think that, Cecilia, you had mentioned this early on, but it's just that ultimately, like, it is so expensive to run a live video service, regardless of how like profitable, how large you are. I think it's actually more expensive the larger you get because you have more people who are just watching and not actually contributing to the cost of it. But I think that there's a key reason why the only players who have stayed in live or who have introduced to live is platforms and services that have other business models and other revenue streams that can subsidize them. There isn't a single platform out there that is live only in the way that Twitch offers or YouTube can offer with like YouTube Live that is profitable and sustainable. I think it's also, this is something that I called out in a Twitter thing like a couple days ago. I think it's an unfortunate comparison. I don't think it's completely unfair, but it's not accurate to compare the revenue models and the streaming capabilities of a patron service like Patreon or Fansly or any of those services like it is to Twitch, because you are not having, like, you can get somebody to spend the same $5, whether they're subscribing on Twitch, tipping through Streamlabs, or subscribing on Fansly or any of those services. But who's actually serving the highest cost service there? It's Twitch or the video service, because they have to serve 600 or six megabytes per second, 10 megabytes per second HD video, for every second to all corners of the world. So I think that it's not impossible, but think of how many live services have come and gone since Twitch has entered the business. It's really difficult. I can tell you, at least on my hand, 5 ex-Twitch employees who have said, I can do this better. They go off 2 years, they get funding, and those services are not successful. Not because they're not brilliant. It's just really difficult.
Yeah, I would agree with what Zachary's saying. Other companies that, sorry, I'm hearing an echo. It's okay. Companies that are good candidates to run their own live streaming services are companies that own their own servers. And one of the things that both gaming and tech journalists don't talk about enough is the fact that owning your own data centers, owning your own servers is going to be an increasingly important part of tech companies' ability to scale into the future and to sustain themselves. There are a lot of companies out there that do not own their own data centers, like Sony, from what I understand, that are going to have a lot of trouble as cloud becomes one of the, not cloud gaming, not streaming video games, which is just a really niche aspect of what cloud gaming means, but just cloud in general becomes a huge facet of every tech company's ability to deliver their services at low latency around the world. So with that said, I mean, Microsoft's Mixer was very fair. It was a good place to work. It offered streamers really good deals. It offered really good discoverability. Their partners were so nice and so hands-on with streamers in a way that Twitch people who stream on Twitch wish that the employees were a little bit more hands-on there, and it failed. And I want to kind of circle back to one of the important things that Zach brought up in the middle of in the beginning of this call, which is that Twitch developed this culture, and Twitch culture is not transferable anywhere else on the internet. And that's a product of the streamers, and it's a product of the design of the platform itself. I remember when the Overwatch League moved over to YouTube, and there were a lot of complaints because the fandom for the Overwatch League Online had developed through emotes. It had developed through cheers and bits and all of these things that were very Twitch specific, and the skin drops and everything, and the Prime integration. And YouTube couldn't deliver on some of these things that really were able to foment that community. And I know YouTube has done leaps and bounds a lot of really great work at developing its own products to maintain and foster their own communities there. But at this point in time, it's so hard to imagine a company that had the server capacity and also the culture making capacity that Twitch has.
That's a very fair point. I think it's the culture feels like it's overstated for some reasons, but understated for others. And what you just pointed out is one of the understated portions of what people don't talk about it. And I think the last thing I'll just say about that before we wrap up is the other part of Twitch that from a monetization perspective that's changed that I think is particularly unique to the platform, and part of the reason that a lot of users do subscribe is the Prime sub. And it's something that's functionally changed the platform very significantly in a way that if somebody was to go out and they would probably even have to pay Amazon Web Services for this technology, right? It is hard to build a live streaming service, and there aren't many other competitors you can use. But even if you were to say, and by the way, people have tried, because this is part of what Riot Games tried to do with Baseball Advanced Media a few years ago, and they ended up just giving up because Riot couldn't figure it out. Disney bought BAM and said, we're paying too much money, and both parties parted their ways and walked away from each other in the end, right? And Riot just went back to Twitch and did a new deal with Twitch and stayed around on the platform. So, it is tough, even for companies as big as Riot Games, to figure out this very specific thing. But even if somebody was to figure it out and put like a subscriber button that was linked to Stripe or PayPal or a payment processor on whatever the web page is, meaning the margin would be like 90% instead of, or lower or higher than 90%. Even if that was the case, the ability for someone to already have a service they already pay for in Amazon Prime and being able to just toss in some money into the pool cannot be understated, the amount of people who use that functionality. And things like Twitch Tracker do track that. So I would very much encourage the audience, if you want sort of to understand the ramifications of that, go look. There is data on that shows how many people are real Prime subs and how many people are actually paid subs. And it's disproportionate usually to the Prime subs. So that's my point. Anywho, thank you both, Zach and Cecilia, for doing this discussion, and to Chris and Theo for the good questions. Thank y'all so much. That's going to be it for this conversation in space. We appreciate you sticking with us for the past 90 minutes, and everybody have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, y'all. It was a pleasure.
That's all for our show. If you like this podcast, please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Special thanks to Sammy Daig and Prem Thadamkara for working on this episode. We'll see you on Friday.